not have access to the chat. So if you don't have access to the chat, that is working correctly. If you have, if you don't see the Q&A, that's what this screen is. Look for the three dots at the bottom right of your screen, probably select Q&A, and a Q&A box should pop up. That's where you can ask us all these questions. Make sure you ask them to all panelists. That way, whoever is looking in the chat, Hannah, Melissa, or myself, will make sure to get back to you. If you only send it to one of us, we might not see it, and then we might not answer your question. So before we continue on, I will just take a moment and stop and say we'll say our introduction. So I am Kiera Collins. My pronouns are she, her. I am one of, along with Melissa, the state agency liaison for all Cal ICH programs. So many of you might have seen or heard Melissa or myself in other office hours if you have other grants, or in many of the other hats we wear at Abt Associates in all of the HUD and California work that we do. Hannah, could you go ahead and introduce yourself? You don't have to come off
Hello.
screen, or I can introduce. Hi.
I'm Hannah, and I also am on the TA team as a project manager, and I go by she, they pronouns.
Hannah will be helping, I will be one of the folks today helping us make sure we don't lose track of any questions and answers. Hannah also helps us with questions that come into the inbox, so you might see responses from her or I there. And then Melissa, we are having some parenting things today, so Melissa, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Melissa Stevenson. Thanks, Kara. My pronouns are she, her. I am also one of the TA liaisons at Abt for Cal ICH Grantees. I'll pass it back to Kira.
Okay. And then, Kayla, if you want to go ahead and start the recording. Oh, it's already going. Never mind. I will mention Kayla Thompson is on the call from Abt Associates, and she will be helping with any tech issues. So if you have any tech issues, feel free to put those in the chat, and she will be helping out with all of those. And then also, Kayla, if you can launch our poll. We do just want to, as I mentioned, want to know all the grantees or grants that you might have participating in. So it's a check all of the above or none of the above. That'll just help Melissa and I know who's on the call today and how to make sure, what we want to make sure to highlight of differences between. So if you could go and do that pretty quickly. I think, Kayla, we can leave that open for a minute or two, but then I'm going to move on to the next slide so we don't waste any time. I will start going into some of the AB 977 background. And Melissa, I know I can see kind of cute NAs coming in. If it's helpful to say them as we go so that it's not confusing, let me know. Otherwise, I am going to not pay attention to those. So AB 977 background is, sorry, I was just trying to figure out if I could see the poll answers yet. But the AB 977 background, some of you might know, some of you might not. AB 977 is a statute at the state level that requires grantees of state-funded homelessness programs, including the ERF program, to enter data into their local homeless management information system. So we've mentioned HMIS before. That is an acronym. It stands for Homeless Management Information System. And there are 44 different regions and different HMIS systems in the state of California. So AB 977 requires grantees to get connected with their local COC, continuums of care, and that the HMIS system that is connected to that COC, and make sure that they get all their data into that HMIS system. So part of entering data into HMIS is to set up projects and to enter universal data elements and common data elements. These are described in detail in the HMIS data standards and the AB 977 project setup instructions. Let me just double check. Yeah, so Melissa put that in the chat. We will add that to the chat a couple times throughout for anyone joining us later on, but we have just updated the project setup instructions. And so what's at that link in the chat today is the most up-to-date, which includes specific examples for ERF-2-R grantees at the bottom of that document, and a couple edits for other updates, which we'll talk about. But so for people that are on this call that have other programs as well, there's still some updated information for those programs as well. Okay, great. So it looks like we do have a fair amount of HAP recipients and a fair amount of other ERF. So yes, so I will say that if you also have HAP and other ERF programs that you're connected to or working with, there are some specific things that I will try to point out, and Melissa will try to point out throughout. If you have questions about how this might differ, let us know. We're not going to spend a lot of time going into all of the changes in that project setup document, but if you have, to the extent you have specific questions, let us know. Like I said, there's additional ERF-2-R examples, which we will go over at the end of today, but there are also some updates related to the HMIS data standards changing, as we said here, and those apply to all Cal-ICH grantees and all AB 977 programs that are required to comply with AB 977. So for AB 977, the requirement is that grantees should set up their projects and start entering client data as soon as they can if you have not already. So if you might already be connected to your COC and your HMIS lead. If you're a brand new ERF-2-R grantee, you might not be, and you can reach out to us with questions about that. Melissa will put our email address in the chat. This email address is the one-stop shop for anything related to AB 977 TA that Abt is helping Cal-ICH provide to grantees. And so you can email that email and we will figure out who the best person to respond to you is, including if you need help getting connected to the HMIS lead. That is going to be the first thing that you need to do, because they are going to be the ones that get you set up into the HMIS system. We cannot do that, but we can help tell you who that is and get you connected to them. And then we can answer any other number of questions with you and or your HMIS lead to help make sure you have all the information you need to know how to enter your data appropriately. So then Cal-ICH is monitoring compliance with AB 977 through reports from HDIS. So HDIS is the statewide, state level, basically HMIS data system. So all of the 44 local HMIS systems will upload their data quarterly into the HDIS system, and then reports will be run from there. You don't have to worry about any of that process, but we are just letting you know that's how compliance is going to be done. So as long as you get it into your local system, then the HMIS leads take it from there, uploading it to HDIS, and other people are involved in running those reports and following up on compliance. So I've already mentioned some of this. They're locally operated software that specifically for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, and they all have the same universal and data elements in them and requirements, but the data, basically different vendors maintain those systems, and so they can just look a little bit different from COC to COC, but the basic like requirements and what they have to have and stuff like that is I would say the basic requirements is the same. There are other differences that might come up. The HMIS lead agency is that organization that oversees the HMIS software and the HMIS system for the continuum of care that I mentioned before. So there's 44 continuums of care, there's 44 HMIS software, and you just have to worry about getting connected to the one that you are, that is relevant to you. It is sometimes based on county, very rarely city, and oftentimes multiple counties. So depending on who you serve or where your projects are, that sometimes can get a little bit, you know, it's not a one-to-one, county-to-county relationship. So we're happy to help you figure out who that is. So as I mentioned, the first step is to set up the projects. One of the things that Melissa will be talking about is that so I'll take a step back and say that we talk in this TA to distinguish between different words. Programs are what we call the funding unit. So ERF is a program, and then there's, you know, ERF-1 and ERF-2-R and, you know, stuff like that that are different than FHC, HAP, which are different programs. And then there are grantees that fund different services or housing, like physical locations or vouchers, and how that gets set up in an HMIS as a project can be very different. And so especially for ERF-2-R, that's some of the things we're going to want to spend a lot of time at the end of this going over. But so figuring out how the project needs to be set up in HMIS might not be a one-to-one correlation with a grantee or with a specific service or service provider, et cetera. So that is step one. You will work with your HMIS lead to figure that out and help it get set up in the system. But we are here to help you and the HMIS leads with any questions if anything gets a little bit confusing based on like how things are working, what the funder requirements are. So, you know, this is AB 977, but in order to have information in the reports that Cal ICH needs, they're going to ask you to set up projects in a specific way. And so, you know, all of that, we're here to help and make sure that everyone's on the same page and doing that so that everyone gets what they need out of it as well. We will talk about the funding codes. That will probably be the easiest part of the setup. And then more information on, well, yeah, I'll just go to the next page because we'll talk a little bit about the other pieces. So that ERF funding code, there are two things that get set up in HMIS. So it's the other funder code and the grant ID. And we have here, so here at the bottom, ERF-2-R, the other funder code is that CA Cal ICH ERF-2-R. That will be set up by your HMIS lead. You will just need to ask them where to go to, you know, mark it off. And then the grant ID will be the contract number appended to your previous assigned grantee ID. In the project setup instructions that we have linked in the chat, it has everyone's project setup grantee IDs, which didn't have, previous versions didn't have the ERF-2-R grantee, the new grantee IDs. So the one up online right now should have everyone on this call's grantee ID in it. So, and then that grantee ID example on the far right would be showing how you take your grantee ID and then underscore and the contract number. This is, again, also this table and information is also in the project setup instructions. So you don't have to wait for any materials from us to go ahead and start looking at that and have this information. So that all will have to be, we'll talk about that. That'll have to be connected to the projects that you're setting up. So that's one piece. So the project setup, the funding codes and grant identifiers, and then these universal and common data elements. So these are entered for all clients. So there's project level information and organization level information in HMIS, and then there's individual client level information. And the universal data elements are required for all clients. There, as it notes here, some universal data elements are relevant to the specific project type and household member. So there's some things that are only asked of certain projects. There's some things that are only asked of head of households or adults or something like that. These things include like name for all household members, and then housing move-in date is an example of something that's only required for heads of households for permanent housing projects. So if you had an emergency shelter, then you wouldn't have that move-in date requirement. And then some data elements, common data elements, are collected at different stages of the enrollment. So prior living situation is, sorry, am I messing this up? Prior living situation, no, never mind. Prior living situation is only collected at the client's project start. So I think the hope here is that since ERF-2-R projects are new and they should be being set up right when or before clients are served, that all of this initial data would be able to be collected and entered. Like all the information, all the variables that it says we want for clients at project start would be entered for all clients. If that's not possible for some reason, then you can reach out to us with questions about that. But that is, and for those of you who had maybe HAP or particularly HAP projects where you might have been providing services or housing for a lot, like for a period of time way before all of this information was set out, we had kind of given the guidance that you wouldn't have to, or the instructions, I should say, that if people, for 2 years ago were maybe not, that information, that entry data information wasn't available 2 years later, there was some wiggle room there. And so the expectation now is that since we're getting ahead of this and it's at project start, then we'd have all that entry information. But again, let us know if you have, if you think there's any differences in that. So I am going to stop and see. It looks like we only have one.
We have one question.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm wondering if, I feel like
I can go back to that slide if you want.
Yeah, why don't you go back to that slide? And I don't know if you want me to, if you want to take a break.
Oh, you took it from me.
Yeah, I took it. Why don't you take a break from presenting?
Okay.
And I'll go back. Yeah, sorry about that. So before we go on to the project setup examples that are really specific to ERF-2-R and any later rounds of ERF, I'll just go back to this just to answer this question. So we have a question about grant ID, and can you clarify what the implications would be for communities who receive funding from multiple grant rounds? So can you add in a funding code if you already have a project set up from a previous round? So I'm going to give you the in general guidance, which also applies in the any project in HMIS, and then you need to keep in mind any specific project setup requirements for ERF-2-R, which we'll talk about in a minute. So in HMIS, a project can have more than one funder, which means you can have more than one of these AB 977 specific. We created them for AB 977 funder codes. So yes, if you could have a project that has both ERF-1 and ERF-2L, you would just enter funding information in two separate records. So that's going to look, how you do that, where you go, what screen, what you click. That does look a little different in each system, which is why, we can't walk through exactly what it looks like in an HMIS. So you really, if you're having trouble figuring out how to do that in your system, really the first person to go to or people to go to are the people who work at the HMIS lead, because they work with that software and they know where it goes. So, but yes, a project can be funded by more than one funder. You could also have a federal, like it says in the second bullet. It can be federal. Sorry, I'm having my Word document keeps popping back up on my screen. You can have a project that is funded by more than one state program. It could be funded by more than one federal program. It could be funded by a combination of those, by local programs. It could have private funding. So that is completely normal and typical in HMIS. So you can add more than one funding code. So, and that also applies to different rounds. But keep in mind the examples for ERF-2-R projects specific. Set up specific for ERF-2-R in later rounds, because you need to make sure that if one of those funders is ERF-2-R, that you're setting it up in a way that aligns with those requirements. So, and I'm sure there'll be more questions like this as we go through, so we can also circle back to some of that after we go through the ERF-2-R examples. So yeah, so we're like the main really focus of this office hours today is just really so we can walk through a lot of these ERF project setup examples because they are specific for this program and for this 2R round and later rounds, whereas there's a lot of other things about HMIS that you will need to go to your HMIS lead for their trainings on because they're software specific. So that's why we didn't focus a lot on, specific data elements that you'll need to enter, because you will need to go and do whatever is required for your DOC. However, what we're going to go through now is specific to this program. And it is also covered in the updated project setup instructions, which I linked in the chat, and we can link again. So you can always reference that as well. So project setup requirements for ERF-2-R, it's actually starting with ERF-2-R. So starting with that round, projects for ERF must be set up so that Cal-ICH can identify in HDIS. You need to be able to identify all the served clients from each designated encampment, or whether it's one encampment or you as a grantee are serving multiple specific encampments with ERF funding. We need to be able to identify all the clients from those encampments that are served by ERF funded services or activities. And we'll look at some examples and what that really means for you. But basically, only clients from a single encampment that's served by that ERF funding can be enrolled in one project. So if you are a grantee that serves more than one encampment with your ERF-2-R funding, those need to be in separate projects. So you'll be able to say, okay, in project 1, we know all of the specific encampments clients. We can look who's in project 1. We know they're all in the same encampment. We know it's all the clients in that encampment that were served with ERF-2-R, that the encampment was served with ERF-2-R funds. And we're not mixing and mingling people from either different encampments or from different other clients that you as a grantee, or if you have a contracted provider, might be serving that are not funded ERF funding. So it's sounds a little confusing, but we'll look at the examples and hopefully that'll make it a little more clear. So within each HMIS project, all clients from the designated encampment must be enrolled. And clients not from the encampment must be enrolled in separate projects. Examples of project setup for ERF-2-R and future rounds can also be found in Appendix D of the updated project setup instructions for Cal-ICH grantees. And that has been updated at that link, so you can go there, like I said, and review that as well. And we really, even after this office hours, highly recommend you review that. And then we'll also have future opportunities for questions and answers beyond this session as well. Okay, so here's one example one. So we have a county grantee. They're using ERF-2-R funding for street outreach and services for residents of one encampment. We're going to call that encampment 1 in this example. So we have outreach services that are provided to clients while they are residing in that encampment 1, to help them find shelters or permanent housing. Now, those shelters and permanent housing are not funded by ERF-2-R. So ERF-2-R and this grantee is just using it for that street outreach services, or excuse me, they are using it for the clients in that encampment 1, but then once the clients are moved to the shelters or permanent housing, the grantee is continuing to provide services for those people who are in the shelters and permanent housing, but they're not funding the shelter or the housing with that. So they're funding services, right? So, and the provider is only serving clients from encampment 1. So the way you would set it up in HMIS is that you would have one street outreach project, which we're calling here Street Outreach Project 1. Don't use that. That is just an example name. You don't need to copy that. You should give it a name that actually makes sense for you and your HMIS. But in this example, we have Street Outreach Project 1. And in that, you will enroll any clients from Encampment 1, and they remain enrolled in that street outreach project while they are living in the encampment or residing in the encampment. Now, once they are placed into either temporary housing or shelter or permanent housing, you're placing them off the streets, right? You're getting them into some kind of living situation, even if it's shelter, but you, the grantee or the contracted provider that they're working with, is continuing to work with those people to help them sort of stabilize off the streets or in housing. So in that situation, you would also set up a services only project, which we're calling here Services Only Project 1, and you would enroll any clients from Encampment 1 that are receiving those supportive services after they move into shelter or housing. So once they move into shelter or housing, you would exit them from the street outreach project because they're no longer on the streets or unsheltered or in the encampment. So they're no longer enrolled in a street outreach project, but you would enroll them in a services only project, which would only have those clients from that encampment who are receiving those services. So yeah, if you're funding a provider who does supportive services for lots of different people who aren't from the encampment, those cannot be enrolled in the same project. You need to be able to look at like a list of clients from that services only project and know that they're from Encampment 1.
Melissa?
Yeah.
We have a couple questions before you move on to example 2.
Okay, sure.
I think.
Yeah, we have 2 more examples. Why don't we see what the questions are? It's possible that those scenarios might be addressed in the other examples.
Yeah, I can read them out and then you can decide if they'll be.
Yeah, I think it would be good to at least cover some of them. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, so the first question is, when you say that all clients from the encampment must be enrolled in the project, do you mean those that are served by the ERF funding? Some clients may not engage, so just wanted to clarify that point.
That's a great question. And it's probably a little bit clearer in the instructions, but you should enroll all the clients in that encampment. The encampment is served by that funding. So even if some clients are not engaging, you can enroll all the clients in that encampment in the street outreach project. And in street outreach projects, street outreach clients, there's also fields that you, and if you're already in HMIS, you might be familiar with this. There's a date of engagement field. So every time the clients are engaged, you track that. So if they're not engaging, you wouldn't track that information, right? But they need to at least be enrolled in the project. The idea here is that ERF is funding the entire encampment and not just services for the entire encampment.
So then the next question is, some of our outreach programs are funded through PATH. It looks like the guidance say that ERF clients could be enrolled in PATH as long as they are also enrolled in the specific ERF program. Is that correct?
So I believe, I'm going to assume you mean PATH, the federal program that I'm now forgetting what the acronym stands for exactly, but I know they fund street outreach. So you could have a project in HMIS that is both funded by ERF and PATH, but everyone in the project has to be from that ERF encampment. And then if there are other clients who are not served in the ERF encampment but are served by the PATH program, they would need to be in a separate project. A little might be I don't know if we have an example that gets to this in this office hours, but if that's a little confusing even after you read the instructions, if you want to reach out to our email and we can talk it through a little bit. The key, you can have a project in the ERF encampment street outreach project that is also receiving other funding. You can have another funder on it, but the implication is that everyone in that project is from that encampment, the ERF encampment, and everyone is funded by PATH as well. So it kind of, how you set it up kind of depends on who PATH is actually funding. So it could kind of vary by community. So it might be easier to maybe walk through, or we can talk through it via email.
The next question is, we applied to provide services to an encampment, quote, project area with several encampment sites within a larger project area. Can we consider the project area as one designated encampment for the purposes of HMIS setup?
Just rereading this. So my understanding is that separate encampments need to be in separate projects. If you think you have, if you think your application kind of has it set up differently, why don't you reach out via email? But in the guidance here is that each encampment needs to be its own project. Why don't I move to the next? I know there's some others.
Yeah, there's a lot, but yeah, why don't you move and I'll kind of triage as you talk.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so second example. In this example, a city funds their a street outreach provider. So they contract with a provider who works in doing street outreach. They provide outreach services to 2 different encampments with that ERF-2-R funding. We're going to call them Encampment 1 and Encampment 2. I know it's not very creative, but the provider also works with a third encampment, but those services for the third encampment are not funded by ERF-2-R. So that third encampment, not funded by ERF-2-R. So what the grantee would do in this scenario is they would set up 2 street outreach projects with that ERF-2-R funding code. So we're going to think of those as our ERF-2-R street outreach projects. And then anyone from that third encampment, they should not be enrolled in those first 2 projects. So on the table, you see there'll be a street outreach project 1, which would be any clients from encampment 1 while they're in the encampment. Street outreach project 2 is any clients from encampment 2. And then you could have 1 or more other street outreach projects, just kind of, depends on your other fund, if you have any other funder requirements, or just how you're operating on the ground. And those would be any clients from the third encampment, or any other clients that the street outreach provider is serving who are not in encampment 1 or encampment 2. So in no scenario are we enrolling the clients from encampment 2 into the street outreach project 1, or vice versa. And we're not enrolling any of the third encampment clients into either of those, right? So it needs to be pretty clear when you're looking in HDIS and you look at the project and who's in the project, that everyone in project 1 is from encampment 1 and everyone in project 2 is from encampment 2. That's kind of the clear, that's sort of like the threshold here, what we're trying to accomplish with this specific project setup. Should I move to the next example, or do we want to look at questions, Kira?
I think just go through the next example and then we'll see what we got.
Yeah, we just have one more here. I think there's a 4th in the instructions, so we wanted to make sure we had enough time for this Q&A. So we'll just go through this one, and then we'll do more questions and answers. So in this example 3, a COC is a grantee, and they fund multiple street outreach providers and one emergency shelter for clients living in the encampment identified in their application. So in this example, there was one encampment in their application, but it's being served by multiple street outreach providers, as well as an emergency shelter. So the grantee or the provider that they're contracting with would set up at least one ERF-2-R street outreach project and only one ERF-2-R emergency shelter project. So in this case, you can, for the street outreach project, you can have more than one. But as long as those two, say you set up two, say there are two providers and they just, it makes more sense for them to individually enter their the people they're serving into two separate projects. But you need to be able to combine all the clients in those two projects, and that is inclusive of everyone from that encampment. So as it says here, and it's also in the instructions, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but that street outreach project 1 or multiple street outreach projects would be any clients from encampment 1. So they could choose to set up more than one street outreach project, but taken together, all clients from encampment 1 must be included in those projects. So in all 3 of these examples, the designated encampment or encampments, if there are more than one, they need to all be in one project or more than one project, but you have to be able to identify them sort of distinctly. We can't have one project with clients from multiple encampments in it, basically. And then in this example, the grantee is also funding emergency shelter for the clients from that encampment. So they would set up an emergency shelter project 1 and enroll any clients from encampment 1 who were placed into the emergency shelter that they are funding. So that emergency shelter project would only include clients from encampment 1. And then if there are any other clients being served by either the street outreach provider or the emergency shelter, they need to be in separate projects. We can't have any people who are not in that ERF-2-R encampment mixed in with them, if that makes sense. I know this is kind of a lot of words around project setup. It sounds a little complicated, maybe. If you're still a little confused, we have to, we're here. That's why we're here. It's not like, you walk away today and you need to do it exactly right, tomorrow. We are here via email. We have the project setup instructions. We're going to have more opportunities. I believe there's a drop-in session later this month, and if you email us and it's not something that can be easily answered via email, we can also meet with you as well and do sort of one-on-one TA. So we can help you work through that. And we'll also be communicating the requirements to the HMIS leads as well. So they will be able to help you with your project setup. But I think at this point, I would, if you have specific questions around the project setup for ERF-2-R, email us first, and so we can help talk you through it. So
yeah.
Jump over
so
to the Q&A.
I am going to try to ask them in a grouping that makes sense. So I'm going to start with one I think might be easy. It's where did it go? Well, hold on. There we go. Can clients be duplicate enrolled in other HMIS projects to track their data for leveraged funding as well as ERF funding? Those leveraged programs will also be serving non-ERF clients.
So there are, so duplicate or duplicate enrollments is a little bit of a hot topic with HMIS. In some situations, yes, they can be enrolled in more than one project, but it depends on the project type. And I'm going to look for, actually, there is a little bit of guidance the HUD has out, but it's really more geared to the HMIS lead. So I'm not sure if it's the best, but basically they can't be enrolled in multiple projects where it implies that they are physically sleeping in more than one place at the same time. So basically you can't be in 2 emergency shelters at the same time. You shouldn't be in a shelter and in permanent housing with a housing move-in date at the same time, because it's just not physically possible for a person to be living in 2 units at the same time. However, you can be in a services only project and be in an emergency shelter. You can be in a services only project and be in a permanent housing project at the same time. So, I mean, if you have specific questions, specific scenarios that you're thinking of, we probably want to talk through that on more of a one-on-one basis. And also, I would recommend also the HMIS lead. They should be aware of when it's possible, but you can always reach out to us.
I also just put in the chat the FAQ document. This document is currently for all 4 round 1 8977 departments and their programs. And so at the beginning, there is a section that kind of we think apply to most grantees, or at least a lot of grantees across departments. And then there is a Cal ICH specific section that has various questions that we've received for Cal ICH specific grantees. There are, to get at what Melissa's talking about, there are a couple different scenarios in that document as far as can clients be enrolled in 2 different project types at the same time. So it also has a wealth of other questions and answers. So that is a resource you can definitely check out in the meantime, as well as asking your HMIS lead enough. I also want to note that we might probably not have time to answer all these questions before the end. So we will do our best to reach out to folks afterwards. Also, though, when we get questions from places like this and the inbox, we do add them to the FAQ document and update that monthly. So that's always being updated and added to represent the questions that we're getting. So if a community, to you, Melissa, if a community is working with multiple encampments and has multiple programs, one for each encampment, and a client moves from one encampment to another, how do we handle that?
Oh, that's a good question. If you're working with multiple encampments, let's say it's a street outreach, multiple encampments, you're going to have more than one street outreach project. And if someone moves from one encampment, encampment 1 to encampment 2, you would exit them. You put into HMIS an exit date from encampment 1 project, and then enroll them in the other encampment project. Now, I mean, I know if people are unsheltered or encampments, it might not be as clear cut as someone, moving in or out of housing, but that's the ideal. So, we all do our best to update the information accurately, right? So that would be how you would represent that.
Then I think we need to go, and let me know if you have more, but I'm gonna keep us on answering questions quickly. I'm not exactly sure of the next question, Melissa. So whoever asked this, if you want to provide follow-up information, if we don't get it exactly right, they asked do we move clients already registered with HMIS prior to receiving this grant to a project?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure if I'm interpreting this right, but I'm thinking this is a person who has a record at HMIS already, but they're not currently enrolled in a project. If that's the case, yeah, you need to enroll them in a project. HMIS, I mean, I may be making a this might be, maybe I'm not interpreting right. Maybe there's more going on. And if that's the case, you should email us for sure. But until someone's enrolled in a project, they're not going to show up, you know, on a report of ERF funded services and activities, for example. They need to be enrolled in a project. Now, if they're already enrolled in another project, I think that's something where maybe we should discuss. We can email us about, and we can work with you to make sure that they're not any issues with how they're enrolled in different projects in HMIS.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I see there are a couple of questions that kind of ask about project setup for different project types that are not ERF funded. So these requirements that I went through, these examples, are for ERF funded services, activities, and housing. So when I said you need to set up a separate services only project, for example, for people from One Encampment, that's just about a services only project funded by ERF-2-R and later. So if you have other funding, you should consult your funder requirements about how to set up that project.
Melissa, I think it's sometimes helpful to ask the question. Are you answering that for the one that's asking about service? Yeah, but I think
there are a few questions that ask about how to set up projects that are not ERF funded. That you should consult your funder. I think that's if it's an AB 977 program, you can email us and we can help you with that.
Yeah, so I think if you, so there's one that says, it is talking, as Melissa said, about services only for projects not funded by ERF funding. If you are talking about other AB 977 funding, feel free to reach out to us. If it's not AB 977 funding, then the best person would be or the best people would be to reach out to your HMIS lead and or the funder of that funding. The next question is, if people move from an ERF-2-R funded outreach to non-funded non-ERF-2 funded interim housing, they should be enrolled in a services only program, even if once they exit outreach, they are not receiving any services by ERF-2. Is that another one that you were kind of answering with that?
Yeah, no, the services only is only if that's, funded by ERF-2-R, or later ERF rounds.
So I think it kind of, if I'm reading that correctly, it goes back to like, if they are entering interim housing that's not ERF-2-R funded, and you need to figure out who the funding is and what the HMIS requirements are for that funder. So I'm going to really quickly, I think someone else asked, how would you track clients in HMIS if they move from one ERF funded encampment to another ERF funded encampment? I think Melissa already answered that. So if that was you and you have follow-up questions, let us know. Melissa, we have one person asking about home key projects. So they're asking, how would we approach an encampment that may have some individuals participating in the home key projects? And then the same person said, can you expand on the project setup that can implement street outreach programs in partnership with home key?
So that's a great question. So I do not know the HMIS requirements for home key. So I will preface this with that. So I can't, that's not, or actually I do know, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Project Room Key. Home Key is one of our programs. There are too many keys. So in that case, I should double check with some of our other TA providers who work more directly with HCD on that one, just to check what we've been saying in terms of home key project setup. But you can have more than one funding code on a project. So as long as everyone enrolled in that street outreach project that's funded, that is from that one encampment, that one ERF-2-R encampment. If some of those clients are also funded by HomeKey, I think we just need to check whether we can apply HomeKey to the whole project or not. That's the one thing I'm not sure of. That I would recommend you can send us an email and we can forward that. You know, we can consult with our colleagues who are more directly working with HCD.
So then we have, we are using our ERF-2 funding for interim and permanent housing and leveraging other resources for street outreach. One of the slides indicated that everyone from the encampment should be enrolled into an ERF-2 program in HMIS. Since we are leveraging the outreach resources, I'm not sure how this would work, as we would only be enrolling individuals who are funded through ERF-2, correct? And if you...
Yeah, I'm just rereading it.
Okay, yeah, I'm like, do you see it? Because it is a bit of a mouthful.
So it sounds like you're not using ERF-2-R for street outreach. So if you're funding interim and permanent housing, you would have projects set up with those project types. So interim could be, it could be transitional housing, or it could be emergency shelter potentially, and then permanent housing project types. And in those projects, you would enroll only clients from that encampment. Yeah, so it would just be those that are moved into from the encampment that move into the interim and permanent housing would be enrolled in those projects. If there's more, there's more nuance, again, you can email us. Sometimes it's hard to get all the details on an office hour, so yeah. But if your outreach is not funded by ERF-2-R, then you don't need an a street outreach project for ERF-2-R.
So trying to think, do we still create multiple projects for multiple encampments if all individuals are placed into the same shelter?
So do we create multiple projects for, yeah, so multiple, each encampment, those clients cannot be mixed into the same project. Yes. But yeah.
So I'm going to go in order now, and if we don't get to your question, we please email that AB 977 email. So because this next question might be take us to time. We have an agreement with a separate jurisdiction to partner with us on ERF to cover different areas of the encampment. Can we each have a project totally dedicated to the specific areas, or do we have to have one single project? I think I'm confused on what areas and what jurisdiction, if that's of the encampment or over.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, since the project has to be specific to an encampment, I guess it's theoretically possible an encampment spans more than one jurisdiction, but otherwise, I mean, each encampment they need to be in separate projects anyway. So if there is more to that, yeah, we can follow up via email.
Yeah, I think maybe give us some more details via email, because there's a lot of different directions that answer could go in depending on what the jurisdictions are in areas. Mm-hmm. Next question, we have 2 encampments and 1 emergency shelter. So we should have 3 projects set up in HMIS, is that right? But you are saying we can't have the people from the 2 encampment projects included in 1 emergency shelter project, question mark?
Yes. I know we're almost at time, so I'm gonna keep it short.
Okay, so yes, that's seeming like a yes.
Yeah, so you need they can't have encampment 1 and encampment 2 in the same project.
So yeah, so potentially more than 1 shelter project set up. And okay, maybe I missed this. If you have multiple encampments with clients going into emergency shelters, does each encampment have to have a corresponding emergency shelter project? So that's very similar before. For example, Encampment 1 and Encampment 2 clients both enter emergency shelters. We have to have an ES1 and an ES2 project. So it's basically, I think, the same question.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes?
Yes. Different encampments need different projects. I know we have 1 minute left. So
I think we're actually done. So
I'm sure that we will have at least a few follow-up emails, and that's great. That's why we're here. I know we're just introducing these requirements now, and the updated instructions were just posted. So it's a little new for a lot of us. So I'm sure we'll be talking to many of you soon. And you will hear about future office hours or similar drop-in sessions shortly, and we'll follow up with more information as well. Was there anything else here?
So someone just asked, will we be reaching out or will you be messaging? Please message us. Since we have answered all the questions at this point, we won't be reaching out to anyone. So if anyone has additional information, follow-up questions, new questions, please email the AB977 email. I'm going to drop it in the chat one more time, and let us know, and we'll make sure the right people look at it.
But we will
not be sending out a recording.
Yeah, we'll send out.
We'll follow up with an email. Sorry, to everyone, not individually.
Right. Thanks for the clarification. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.